you so much for coming. You're one of the guys out of Two-Town that we've tried to get hold of for a long time, but we've never had any sort of connection. Of course, recently we did, and now you're here, which is brilliant.
And I was delighted to come as a tourist. If you remember?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I was on holiday, so I don't think I saw you. Oh, you did. You did come and have a look at the museum, didn't you? But you came previously, I think, and you did like an event downstairs, I think.
Yes, yeah, with Daniel Rich.
Anyway, let's get to the questions.
Yes.
Right, the first question, and I ask this to all our guests every time for sounding off, and I'm not talking about influences, but what was the music you were listening to when you were growing up in your household? What were your mum and dad playing? What was on the radio?
Oh, that would have been musicals from the 50s. Lots of who were the great composer? God, I've forgotten their names now. But yes, thank you. And I was. I think by 8 I could sing Bally High from South Pacific. You know?
Oh wow!
And we had the light programme on quite a lot, and in fact when I was about 5 or 6 I sent in a request to Children's Favourites, which was on a Saturday morning.
Oh yeah.
And they mentioned my name on the radio.
Oh wow!
And played my request to Dan Buster's March. So I was a little fame when I was 5.
Oh yeah, that must have been quite a thrill for you.
It was a big thrill.
Yeah, absolutely. You get on national radio.
Yeah.
Of course. And what about early favourites, early influences?
For me, undoubtedly Elvis, who I was a massive fan of. But I used to go to the local record store called White and Swales in Altrincham, where I grew up. And they had those listening booths where you would have 3 or 4 booths down the side of the shop, and I would look for the coolest looking people, you know, and I'd go and stand outside their booths and see what they were listening to.
Oh, well, that's a cool way of doing it.
And through that I found things like Lou Rawls and some of the early blues guys. So I was into North American music until I was like 16, 17, and then I was very lucky in Altrincham. We had a good promoter who promoted the town hall. So I think the first proper band I went to see at 16 was the Spencer Davis Group.
Oh wow, what a band.
Yeah, who I'd not heard of, but we read a review of them and it said they were a mixture of blues and folk, and we thought, oh, that sounds all right, we'll go for that. And to hear Steve Winwood, who I think was still 16.
I was going to say, because he was very young when he started.
Yeah.
But an incredible musician. I mean, guitarist.
Yeah,
one of the greatest sort of white soul voices, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, a great keyboard player as well.
Yeah.
And songwriter.
Yeah.
Some people have got it all.
I stood next to him.
And saxophone.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Where was it? Stratford-on-Avon, about 18 months ago. We were both at a Robert Plant gig when Robert started up his new band. And I couldn't speak to him, I was just in awe. Stevie Winwood, oh!
Amazing. It's a great job. Well, yeah, an amazing band, and of course Traffic, Blind Faith, and all his solo stuff. Absolutely.
I got to know Muff, his brother, quite well later in life.
Great producer.
He was a great producer and a very good A&R man. Yeah. And a director of Watford Football Club, if I remember right.
Oh, right.
Yeah, him and Elton John. But they had some fun.
Yeah, I can imagine, yeah. Right, well, my next question, and I think I'm fast forwarding probably a lot, but you gave me some information and there's probably some chunks missing. Now, we're going from your favourites. Now it says, how did you get into music management? But, I mean, were you ever in a band in between all this?
Briefly.
Yeah? What were you playing?
I was singing.
You were the singist.
I was Brent Ford of Brent Ford and the Nine Elms.
Oh wow! Now there's a name. I used to love all those 60s names.
I don't think you guys are the right age to get that. But that was a brief spell because I was lucky when I arrived in Birmingham. because I don't know if I told you, I was a really good beach bum for a few years.
Oh, right.
In just outside Newquay, and I was very good at that. Did about 4 years of constant summer. I spent the summer in Cornwall and winters in Morocco. And when a friend invited me to come to Birmingham, I left Cornwall and arrived in the Mostyn area of Birmingham. And I met some musicians and ended up living with them in a big sort of hippie commune, really, in '71. And they were amazing writers, singers, players, but they couldn't organise themselves for toffee. So I started putting gigs on, specifically for them, upstairs at the Fighting Cocks in Mostyn. And it was a time when there were rock bands or there were folk groups, and never the two met. And what we set up was acoustic, but we had people from rock bands coming and playing, we had people from folk scene coming and playing, and we focused on being a platform for songwriters. And that's always been my first love, is a good song, then a good singer, and then the rest comes after that. And whilst I was doing that, we never made any money, but it was just such great crack. A chap came up to me, who I knew vaguely, and he said, "I've been watching you. I think you're quite handy. I need a roadie to come on a tour with me." And I said, "What does a roadie do?" And he explained. I said, "Oh, that sounds all right." So I said, "When do you want me to start?" He said, "Well, tomorrow." Oh, okay. So within 48 hours of him talking to me, I was working with Bill Haley and the Comets on a 6-week tour of Britain. I heard Rock Around the Clock 72 times. But hanging out with those guys was brilliant, because they were all big country fans, and they introduced me to Willie Nelson's music, and that sent me off on another musical road, which I really enjoyed. At the time, I think I was the only person in Britain who had much idea about who Willie Nelson was, because he's a couple of his songs had travelled, but he'd not been here, or it wasn't played here. And I did some more roadieing with the Drifters, which was lovely, and that was a real shock, because I remember the first gig we did was in Goole, which is on the way to Hull. And we'd set the PA up, and I was backstage in the dressing room with the band, and they said, "Right, we'll do a warm-up." And suddenly these 4 voices just exploded, and the room just filled with these harmonies like I'd heard it on record, but I'd never sat like this with these amazing voices, and I was like, "Oh, this is special." And that was a major, enjoyable time working with those guys. And then I got a job.
Can I just stop there a second? I noticed there's a telly on at the back. Can you switch that off, Bob, please? Thank you. Sorry about that, John.
I got a job with Transatlantic Records, selling, going around the West Midlands in a car with a heap of records and visiting record stores. So I was effectively a rep for a record company. And we only sold pretty obscure folk, jazz. We did carry the Blue Note label, which was very cool.
Of course, yes.
And most stores weren't that keen to see me, really. The specialists were, but I had to go to H. Smith's, Boots. They all sold albums then, And they were like, "No, don't waste our time." And then the EMI guys swan in with this like amazing catalogue and stuff, still afternoon. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I worked with a fella called Mr. John Dowie and his group, the Big Girls Blouse. And John he's recognised now as being Britain's first alternative comedian. And he was outrageous, and we would go to universities and art centres and chaos would ensue, but he was so funny. And one of my biggest life regrets is that there weren't video cameras around at that time, and there's no film whatsoever of that outfit. You know? But he was very funny, very bright, and completely barking. And that kind of prepared me for later life in a way. If you could deal with John Dowie, you could deal with anyone. Then it came to a point where we said to him, because there were 3 in the band and me, and we said, John, we love you, we love working with you, but because you swear for England, you're never going to get on radio, you're never going to get on TV, so we're going to call it a day. And he said, oh, I'm sorry to lose you guys, but you've been great, we've had a good time. I'm going to give you the PA. So suddenly there were 3 musicians and a PA and me. So something that's right.
Yeah.
So I became Brent of Brentford and the Nylons. And we did my single is now collectible. It goes for about $100 in Tokyo. Yeah. We're known as cabaret punk.
Oh right, okay. That's very niche.
Yeah, I think we're the only one in it.
Yeah.
It was great because it gave me the opportunity to know what it feels like to be a performer. I was an okay singer and I could move all right, but we set these targets and said, well, within 6 months we've got to have done a national TV show, within 6 months we've got to have a record deal. And we hit the first couple, but then we didn't hit the third one of getting a record deal, which is probably because not one of us could write a song. So I thought, oh, well, I've got to do something serious now, because I'd been married during this period, and my daughter was due, and I thought, well, I can't keep going from one thing to another. And I thought, well, I've been to all these venues around the country, so I know them. I've actually been to them. So what would happen if I called them up as an agent and suggested artists to them? So that's what we set up. And I've been doing that for about 18 months when Jerry came along.
Right.
So we set up specifically to find work for West Midlands artists around the UK.
And of course, the story we've seen a few times about you, that Jerry Dammers turning up, you tell us.
That moment, Bob.
That moment, yeah, everything changed.
Yes, it was a wet February afternoon, and I worked from home in Bearwood in Birmingham, and there's a knock on the door, and I open it, and it's been raining, so there's this bedraggled looking chap in a raincoat, and as he said, "Are you John Mostyn?" I realised he didn't really, there was something wrong in the dental section. And so he did cut a strange figure, and he said, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Yeah, come in." He said, "We've made this record, and I pressed 1,000, and I'm worried that we're going to sell them." And I said, "Well, let's have a listen." And I put the record on, and that was Gangsters.
Wow.
And I listened to it right through, just sort of shaking, and I said, "I think you're going to be okay." And set off and booked with them. By the end of that week, I booked them half a dozen dates. Because that was the lovely thing about being an agent. You develop a rapport with the venues that you're dealing with. So I'd gotten to the point with a lot of the West Midlands venues where if I said, "You really should have this," they'd go, "All right, send them over."
There's that trust involved.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
That's really good.
Yeah. So we, and of course within less than 2 months, Noel from the Selector called up and said, "We're real now."
Yeah,
We
of
are
course,
back.
yeah.
And I said, "What you like?" He said, "Oh, we're like them." So, "Oh, okay." So I called up all the same venues, and they had the Selector as well. And then the Beat came along.
Of course, yeah.
A month after that. So I'm calling up these venues and going, "You won't believe it, there's another one." And they all played It was when he was like, I think it was the 76 club in Burton-on-Trent and the 77 club in Nuneaton.
Oh, yeah, I remember that
Sheffield Limit Club, one in, and just, you know, these little venues that were dotted about. It was a great, wonderful time.
So, obviously we're talking about Two Tone and we're talking about the Beat, but of course you became their manager.
Yes.
So how did that work?
Well, the lady and gentleman who introduced me to the Beat, they were in the import-export business, and I had a few spare bob, so they thought they'd have a dabble in the music industry.
Yeah.
And they didn't know anything about it, but they did have the wisdom to bring the band to me. So my first working with the Beat was as an agent, but then they realised that I actually knew quite a lot, and the then management asked me to join them as co-manager. But then as the next year went by, they just didn't like it. Was hard work, and they never imagined it might be hard work. So
what sort of year was this?
This was 79, end of 79. So they gently dropped out.
And you took over completely.
Yeah.
So did you sort of formulate a plan you were going to do for the band? Because weren't they called the sort of Dum Dum Boys or something?
No, that was Rankin Rogers' first band. And in fact, the first gig that the Beat ever did was supporting the Dum Dum Boys at a pub called the Matador in the Bull Run in Birmingham. And Roger tells that he saw the Beat playing before the Dum Dum Boys were due on and thought, oh no, how do we follow that? Because Roger was a drummer in the Dum Dum Boys.
Yeah.
And the next thing that happened between them was Roger loved what the Beat were doing. He came to their next gig at the New Inns on the Moseley Road in Balsall Heath in Birmingham, and he jumped up about halfway through, and I was in the audience because the Beats then management had asked me to check them out. So this was the first time I'm seeing them, and I fall in love with them straight away. But then halfway through, this dynamic young man jumps up and toasts with them, and I'm like, oh my God, what have we got here? And he never left.
Of course, you know, a bit like Neville with the Specials, of course, you know,
yeah.
That's how it was. So, so tell us, you know, obviously, you know, the mechanics of promoting a band like that, and the whole scene that was going on with Two Tone at the time, and of course that first record with Two Tone.
Yeah, I was reminded the other day that whilst the Specials were seriously up and running and getting national attention, and their single had now been released nationally on Chrysalis through Two Tone Chrysalis deal, and I gave Jerry 2 cassettes and I said, these are the 2 hottest things that are happening in Birmingham right now, and one was the Beat and the other was UB40.
Wow.
And Jerry told me that they'd played, or he'd played on the tour coach, UB40 and the Beat, and everyone in the Specials went, we want them. You know, they liked UB40, but it, you know, it was a different vibe. So Jerry asked if we'd do a single on Two Tone, which we jumped at. But Jerry and I knew that we weren't going to stay with Two Tone, because the Beat were, there was ska in their set, but there was a lot of other stuff too, and it was a combination of like, the Two Tone had already put out Specials, Madness, Selector. We didn't want to be the fourth, we wanted to have our own thing going on. So we kind of, everyone was respectful to each other about it, there's no difficulties. When Chrysalis tried to get us to stay on Two Tone, because they wanted the sales. But we were in a lovely position to talk to loads of record companies who all took us out for Japanese lunches, which was the thing then, and eventually settled on a deal with Arista, who would give us our own label.
Of course, Kofi.
Yeah.
Could I just ask a question? Because I've heard, I'm not sure if it's true or not, but I've heard that the first single was going to be for the Beats, Tears of a Clown, Ranking Full Stop, because it was going to be recorded at Horizon, and they actually demoed at Horizon Studios in Coventry, which of course no longer exists, but they didn't like the sound and they went elsewhere. Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah. We tried to keep it local, but it just didn't work. And it was probably as much Bob Sargent, our producer. And in fact, there's a nice little tale that led us to Bob. And I was listening to, in fact, oh yeah, there's a documentary that's been on Radio WM recently.
Yeah, yeah.
Which was pretty good, I thought.
It was
all right. And but Pauline tells this differently. If you listen to what she says there, here's what happened. Much respect to Pauline, but her memory's worse than mine. When I first started working with the Beat, it was quite a thing in Birmingham. I don't know if it was here as well, but a band would do a residency, like every Friday night somewhere.
Yeah, the Specials did that in St George, yeah.
And we did one at the Mercer Cross, a little pub on the corner of the wholesale market in Digbeth. And the first night we had about 50 in the audience, and half of those Roger had brought down from a pub which you might have seen in the news recently called The Crown, where there's a big battle going on in Birmingham to save Station Street with the Electric Cinema and The Crown and the old Rep. So Roger was, he was an A1 punk. He'd got dyed blonde hair and wearing fatigues, and when he saw that there weren't that many people at the venue, he ran up to the crowd and said, "Come on everyone, it's a free gig." Oh, okay. So that's how we made up that first 50. And then the second week we had about over 120. And the third week I had to call the police because there were so many people trying to get in. And that's pure word of mouth. That, no mobiles. We hadn't had any press. It's pure community, just telling each other, check this. Lovely.
Wow.
Anyway, at that point, I'd invited the social secretary from Aston Uni to come and see the Beat. And she came down and said, "I'd love to use them at the ball we've got coming up, but no one will come because no one knows who they are." And I said, "Well, why don't you have a Radio 1 DJ, because people always turn up for them, and we'll have the Beat supporting the DJ." She said, "Who do you think?" And I said, with my brain going, I said, "Oh, John Peel would be good." And she said, "Well, that's a good idea." And consequently, I booked John for her for 350 quid, and the Beat were getting 75 quid. And the Beat played, and the place went crazy because they'd not heard the band before, but they'd heard the Specials and Selector, and were now realising, oh heck, we've got another one. And John came on after, he came to me after he'd seen the band. He said, "If they'll do that set again, I'll spot checks with them." And I went into the dressing room and said, "You got to get back on." And the boys are all sat there soaking, And why? Don't ask, just get on and do all that again. Okay. And then John came to the dressing room afterwards. The crowd went even crazier the second time round because they knew the songs by now. And John came to the dressing room and said, with the social sec, and said, "Write me a cheque for 75, give them a cheque for 350, which was lovely.
Oh, wow.
And we took him for dinner at a curry house on the Ladypool Road. And while we were in there, somebody nicked his band. Oh, pain, so embarrassing. But he called up a couple of days later and said, "Can you do me a session?" Yeah. And we played the John Peel session, and that was great. And we liked the producer, Bob Sargent, and who was a sort of in-house producer at the BBC. And when Arista said, "Well, who would you like to produce your record?" We only knew one producer, so we said him. And he came up to Horizon, but it just didn't work out for whatever reason. And we recorded elsewhere, in London, I think it was. And that was the first single with a cracking B-side as well.
Well, absolutely. We were talking about this the other day. The fact that both sides were really sort of A-sides, really. You know.
Yeah, I think all the bands were good like that from the two-tone period. They didn't see the B-side as a throwaway.
No,
it was part of
it was very much that, yeah.
Which is lovely.
Well, speaking of that, can we introduce Paul Heskett here, which is from the Swinging Cats, and of course, that fine flute sound that you hear on Ghost Town, well, there's the man that created it.
Yes.
Thank you, Paul,
Respect.
for being here. Yeah, respect.
Can I just mention one thing from that period, which doesn't come out very often, but there was a nightclub in Birmingham called Barbarella's, and if you've been watching This Town, the fellow who owns the nightclub is definitely based on Eddie Futrell, who owned Barbarella's. And I went to Barbarella's to see The Damned. This was like a couple of months before the beat came along. And I don't know why, but a lot of National Front kids had turned up to see The Damned, which made no sense, you know. But anyway, they were in the middle of Barbarella's, a couple of hundred of him, doing the Sea Island and stuff. And the DJ put on a track, I can't remember what the track was, but suddenly this young blonde-haired black man leaps onto the DJ podium, grabs the mic and starts chanting, "Fuck off, fuck off, fuck off your National Front," which the rest of the crowd joined in on. It was amazing.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, well, that's a young man to keep an eye on. And that was Roger.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say that.
Yeah.
How did that go down with the right-wing Muppets?
They knew they were outnumbered. But it just took one person to have the bottle to get up there, you know. And Roger had plenty of that.